December 19th, 1944, and the Ardennes forest felt dead and alive at the same time. Frozen trees standing like black teeth while distant guns rolled through the valleys like slow thunder that never stopped. Snow covered everything, muffling footsteps, hiding bodies, hiding fear, and somewhere in that cold maze, 800 American soldiers waited for orders that would decide if they lived through the night. They were tired, cold, and running low on everything that mattered, and the Germans knew it. Because this was the Battle of the Bulge and surprise had worked better than anyone expected. Roads were clogged, units were scattered, radios crackled with half messages, and nothing felt solid anymore. The situation was desperate in ways that maps and reports couldn't capture. Because when you're cold enough and scared enough and tired enough, even simple decisions become impossible. Then one radio call came through. It was wrong. Completely wrong. The man holding the radio wasn't famous, wasn't high-ranking, and wasn't supposed to change the course of anything that day. He was a radio operator, a job built on accuracy, calm hands, and clear thinking under pressure, and in about 60 seconds, he'd make a mistake that should have gotten men killed. Instead, it saved them. He was 22 years old, a kid from Pennsylvania who'd trained for months to repeat coordinates perfectly, because one wrong number could mean shells landing on friends instead of enemies. His unit had been pushed into a shallow defensive line near a small Belgian village, dug in around frozen fields and tree lines that offered more fear than cover. They'd been in position for 3 days, watching the forest, listening to the sounds of battle moving closer, knowing that sooner or later the Germans would come for them too. German armor had been reported nearby, and everyone felt it in their bones, that heavy sense of something big moving in the dark, because the Germans were attacking everywhere at once. Intelligence reports were useless, contradictory, hours old by the time they reached the front lines where men actually needed them. Officers studied maps with flashlights and tried to make sense of reports that didn't match what they were seeing. And the only thing everyone agreed on was that the Germans were coming and there weren't enough Americans to stop them. When the radio crackled to life, it wasn't calm, and it wasn't clear, because another unit was screaming for artillery support, fast. He copied the numbers as best he could, fingers stiff from cold, breath fogging his view, ears ringing from nearby explosions that shook the frozen ground beneath him. The line was bad. Static chewed at every word. A shell landed close enough to knock snow off the trees, and someone nearby yelled for him to hurry. The pressure was crushing, the kind that makes your hands shake and your mind go blank. But he had a job to do and 800 men were counting on him getting it right. He repeated the coordinates back, but one number was off. Just one. He didn't know it yet. He sent the call. Quick thing before we go on. If stories like this pull you straight into the chaos of World War II, hit subscribe to WW2 Vault because we dig into moments like this every week. And this one gets even more intense from here. The artillery answered faster than anyone expected, because American guns were everywhere in late 1944, hidden in forests, behind hills, waiting for coordinates and nothing else. Deep behind the lines, crews loaded shells, adjusted angles, and trusted that the man on the radio knew exactly where to send death. They didn't question the coordinates, didn't double-check the math, because in combat there's no time for hesitation and artillerymen had learned to trust the voices coming through their headsets. The first shell screamed overhead, a sound no one ever forgets, and then they hit. Not where the Germans expected. Not where the Americans expected either. The ground erupted in white snow and black dirt, trees snapping, earth flipping into the air as explosions marched across a frozen field that moments earlier had been quiet. The radio operator's stomach dropped when reports came in, confused, overlapping, because the shells weren't landing on the American line. They were landing beyond it. Too far beyond it. He checked his notes again, heart pounding, fingers shaking, because he knew something was wrong. His training had been drilled into him over and over, the importance of precision, the lives that depended on getting every digit exactly right, and now he'd failed at the one thing that mattered most. But before panic could take over, new voices cut in, sharp and urgent, German voices shouting through captured radios and intercepted lines, because the barrage hadn't missed the fight. It had smashed straight into a German assembly area hidden just past the tree line. What no one on the American side had known, what reconnaissance hadn't spotted and intelligence hadn't reported, was that nearly 800 German infantry, backed by armor, had been staging for a dawn attack less than half a mile beyond the American position. They'd been quiet, careful, waiting for first light to hit hard and fast against a thin, exhausted defense. German officers had picked the spot perfectly, studied the American positions, counted the defenders, and planned an assault that would roll right over them before anyone could react. The wrong coordinates dropped heavy shells right on top of them. Men ran. Trucks burned. Ammunition cooked off in violent flashes, lighting up the forest like lightning trapped on the ground. German officers screamed orders that vanished under the roar, and tanks backed into trees trying to escape blasts that flipped men and machines alike. The carefully planned assault, the product of days of preparation and reconnaissance, disintegrated in minutes under a bombardment that came from nowhere and hit with devastating accuracy. On the American line, soldiers stared in disbelief as fire bloomed in the distance, realizing slowly that the attack everyone feared was being torn apart before it even started. Some laughed, some prayed, some just stared in shocked silence because they'd been certain this night would be their last. The radio operator stayed frozen, listening, trying to understand how a mistake hadn't turned into a nightmare. Artillery kept firing, because no one told them to stop yet, and for nearly 20 minutes, the shells walked back and forth across the German position, turning snow into steam and silence into screaming chaos. By the time the guns went quiet, the forest ahead looked torn open. Smoke drifted through broken trees, and the smell of explosives hung thick in the cold air. When scouts finally pushed forward at first light, rifles ready, they found broken units, abandoned gear, and bodies scattered across the frozen ground, evidence of an attack that never happened. Captured Germans later admitted the truth in short, stunned sentences, because there was no pride left to protect. They'd planned to overrun the American position before sunrise, using surprise and numbers, and they'd been confident it would work, because American lines were thin and supply lines were breaking. Instead, they'd walked straight into hell without warning, without time to scatter, without any chance to fight back. The radio operator was called in later, expecting punishment, expecting anger, because mistakes like that usually ended careers or worse. His hands still shook when he stood in front of his officer, replaying the moment over and over in his head, hearing the static, feeling the pressure, knowing he'd gotten it wrong. The officer didn't yell. He just looked at the map, then looked back at the young man holding the radio, and said quietly that his mistake had saved the entire position. 800 Americans stayed alive because 800 Germans never reached them. Word spread fast, because in war, stories like that move quicker than official reports, and soldiers clung to them the way they clung to warmth and hope. The idea that chaos could turn into luck, that even mistakes didn't always mean death, mattered more than anyone admitted. The Battle of the Bulge dragged on for weeks, brutal and costly, claiming thousands of lives and testing every soldier who fought through that frozen hell. But moments like this added up, unseen turns inside a massive fight where survival often came down to seconds, weather, and decisions made under pressure no one could really understand from the outside. For the radio operator, the war didn't suddenly feel heroic or clean, because he knew how close he'd come to disaster, how easily that call could have ended with American bodies instead of German ones. He carried that weight long after the guns moved on, long after the Ardennes forest thawed and the bodies were buried and the world tried to forget what happened there. Years later, he'd tell his family that war wasn't about perfect plans or flawless execution, but about people doing their best in impossible moments, where fear, noise, and chance all fought for control. He never called himself a hero, and he never bragged about that night, because heroes don't make mistakes that happen to work out. But 800 men went home because a wrong call landed in the right place, and in the frozen forests of Belgium, chance picked a side for once. That's the strange truth of World War II, where massive armies clashed across entire continents, where generals moved divisions like chess pieces and planners spent months preparing for single battles, But history still turned on small moments. A single voice on a radio, a number said wrong, and a decision made under fire that no amount of training could prepare you for. Thanks for watching this story from WW2 Vault. Next time, we're covering another moment where everything almost went wrong, but didn't. So hit subscribe and stay with us as we keep uncovering the hidden stories of the war.